What's going on, skirmishers? Welcome back to Designing Realmwars, which is a video response journal blog thing, I guess, that I'm doing in response to another YouTuber's, like I'm one. There's a YouTuber out there named Sam Pearson who previously was on Games Workshop's design teams, and now he's publishing stuff about making your own games on YouTube. And so I'm following along with that effort. And for some reason, I thought the best format for me to do that was in video format. So what do you know? I am making my own sort of fantasy war game that is heavily inspired by Star Wars Legion. And so I thought I could publish that to our 630 Skirmishers account. So you can follow along your pal Graham and his game design journey. And if you don't care about this, then I still care about you. You don't have to worry about that. But this is just as much for me as it is any kind of content, right? In my first episode, which you can watch right up above me here, that link is up there, and it was sort of just going into the details about what this project is and just like a lot of ideas that I had and just kind of put them all down on the table. And so we kind of went over what some of my starting concepts would be, and then just other random thoughts, and I kind of expanded upon all those. But now we're getting into what Sam Pearson has tasked me with, which is how to design a war game. So we're going to go ahead and watch this, and that's going to set us up for what today's discussion is all about.
So this is part 2, and in this section of the video we're going to put together a document that details your game's vision. It will be something that we can refer to during planning and beyond, and its critical functions are to set direction and to be used as an ongoing metric to evaluate future mechanics.
Pretty straightforward concept there, but I found that when I first started coming up with ideas for this game, I was like, yeah, we can do this and we can do this, and I'm going to write this down. And I got a spreadsheet with a bunch of different like keywords and stuff in it and different unit designs. And it all feels very patchwork. And so it resonated with me when Sam wrote or made this video and said, you need a vision. This is sort of like your overarching thing. And I thought that would be very helpful for me to do, to kind of have a starting point. And then anything that I design, I can always check back with my vision as like a blueprint and say, is this still fitting within the structure that I've created? I have a feeling that a lot of my ideas are maybe fine in a vacuum, but in context they might be lacking, or it might just not fit. So in Sam's video, he references a car designed by Homer Simpson, and it's just got all of his favorite features all slammed into one. And it looks like nonsense, right? Because while each individual thing is good, smashed together, they're bad. There's also something I've heard, the chocolate-covered hot dog, which is like, I like chocolate and I like hot dogs, but they don't necessarily go well together. So I'm trying to avoid the Homer's car. I'm trying to avoid the chocolate-covered hot dog as I'm designing this game. And so we're going to start with a vision. So Sam first tasks us with creating an elevator pitch, and that's what my video today is all about.
Is as follows. What's the elevator pitch for your game? As in, sell me this pen. Tell me in 100 words or so what your game is about and why it is cool.
So I drafted an elevator pitch for Realmwars, which is my miniatures agnostic war game. And I say miniatures agnostic, but it's really heavily inspired by Age of Sigmar. I'm essentially looking to use all my cool Age of Sigmar models, but in a less taxing game. Like, I find the rules for Age of Sigmar to be pretty taxing, and I find that the rule set for Star Wars Legion and several other American miniatures games that I've played to it just makes more sense in my brain, and so that's what I'm setting myself out to do. So here's my elevator pitch, and it might need some editing. It doesn't sound super exciting when I read it, but I'm hoping that this is going to serve as our compass as I'm writing these rules and moving forward. Realmwars is a miniatures agnostic war game in a high fantasy. Well, I already messed it up. Realmwars is a miniatures agnostic war game in a high magic fantasy setting where armies clash to determine the fate of the realms. Units of soldiers crash into each other while warlords bolster their efforts. Sorcerers harness the winds of magic to alter the battlefield. Banners flap. Fear overwhelms. Straightforward unit rules ensure minimal downtime while evoking palpable theme and playstyles. Scenarios reward meaningful choices and clever plays. Unit customization allows for multiple strategies and player expression within a given army. Realmwars is published as print and play and can be played with easily obtainable components. So this is something like 90 words that kind of encapsulates the high concept of what I want. And I thought maybe we could kind of break down what a couple of these phrases are and maybe what I'm alluding to or some ideas that I already have. Like I said, this is not set in stone. Realmwars itself as a game name is like fine, right? It is like kind of vanilla, and I kind of question if I think it kind of needs to be vanilla if it's going to be sort of this miniatures agnostic thing, or heavily borrowing from the aesthetics of Age of Sigmar, of another game. But I don't want to call it like Sigmar's Chosen or something, because that's very copyrightable, probably. Like it infringes on existing copyrights. So I'm not sure where I'm going to land on the name itself. That's a working title. Realmwars is a working title. So to kind of dive in, I said it's miniatures agnostic, but really it's borrowing from Age of Sigmar, at least to start, but I don't care what models you use. That's fine. High magic fantasy setting. So this is a fantasy setting, but it's more than Lord of the Rings, right? More magic than Lord of the Rings. I'm imagining wizards flying up into the air, and they're like having freaking mage battles in the sky kind of thing, above where all these soldiers are clashing on the battlefield. It does say armies clash, so I'm not sure what the sweet spot is going to end up being for army size, but I am envisioning something like a dozen or so units is like a full-size game. If it gets much bigger than that, I think because all of my rules that I've thought of so far are kind of based on that like 8 to 12 unit expectation. If you go much bigger than that, it's going to take you all day to play it. So I'm kind of mimicking that army size. Let's see what else I have here. So soldiers crash into each other while warlords bolster their efforts. So I want to be able to customize. I'll come back to that. I want to customize a unit's function, open up new tactics or specific ways to use a given unit. And one of the ways you can do that is by who you pair them with. So the different characters are going to hopefully be able to allow you to use units in different ways, so you could pick different strategies or play styles and the corresponding characters for those play styles, and then your generic foot troops with spears have a lot of different utility depending on the characters that you're using and how those characters are going to support the armies. If the characters themselves are too potent, particularly like statistically, like on offense and defense, then it becomes like a hero hammer type battle, which is not what I'm going for here. I also say sorcerers harness the winds of magic to alter the battlefield. So I got into Warhammer with the 1996 Warhammer Fantasy Starter Set. which was the Bretonnians versus the Lizardmen. It was the 5th edition starter set. You know it, you love it. Many people owned that particular box. It was awesome. My dad had been shopping around for Warhammer for like years, and he finally got at the gumption to get the starter set when I was like old enough. I was like 10 or 11, I think, when we got it. And he was so excited. That game had, like, out of the box, it had a character and like 4 units for each army. And then a lot of like cardboard tokens and supplemental things so you could play the game. Very cool. But then in order to use Magic, you had to buy a separate expansion for the game that was called Warhammer Magic. And that box had all of the Magic that was available to all the armies in the game. So you only had to buy it once, even if you collected multiple armies. And it was very component heavy, meaning that it was like all the spells and magic items were on cards. And I think that's great. I actually like this product a fair amount. And I think if corporations did it today, they would split it up by army. This is the same way that you buy unit card packs for your army in Legion or Warhammer. So, all that to say, part of the theme of Warhammer Fantasy was the concept of the winds of magic. And it was this chaotic force, this mana that could swirl around the battlefield. And you didn't have a lot of control over necessarily how much magic you might have access to, or whether or not your spells would even fire, and the stress of battle. And it created some variable, uncertain elements in the game. I will go on record as saying that I think roll to use spell, and if you don't roll well enough, you don't get to use the spell, is like very feels bad. I talked about that a little bit in my last video. So it's also one of the things I really don't care for in current Age of Sigmar, which is roll a die on a 3-up, your character issues an order, or roll 2 dice. If you roll 7 or more, the spell goes off, and it's like, I brought them to use the magic. Why did they just do nothing? You know, it feels very strange. It's very unintuitive to me. But I do like the thematic concept of the battlefield being chaotic and magic being fluid and having access to magic as a resource. So I'm looking at ways to sort of randomly determine, either at the start of a round or throughout the course of the round, how much sort of mana or magic you might have access to as a spellcaster. And then going into, like, while that element might be random, you still know what that resource is. Meaning that, like, at the start of the round, you get 6 magic points to spend. Okay, well, that's my budget for the whole round. Next round, I might roll well, and I get 9 magic points to spend. But then the last round, I only rolled 4 magic points. Like, you kind of know what that is, and you have to make the most with what you've got, which I think can be a fun puzzle. So that's what I mean by Winds of Magic. Then the next 2 things I have are Banners Flap and Fear Overwhelms. So I mentioned last video I want courage and psychology to play a role here, and Fear Overwhelms references that. Banners Flap is also like, I feel like it's a mood, right? Like, I imagine a stormy battlefield, you know, the sky is like gray or something, and you hear the clang of metal on armor, and you see one, you know, banner bearer slam the haft of this banner into the ground, and you hear it flapping in the wind as the wind howls over the trees. Like, I don't know, there's something about that is tense, and I like that. So moving on, straightforward unit rules ensure minimal downtime while evoking palpable theme and play styles. So we're talking about unit rules. My goal with every unit is, you know, I have multiple goals, I guess. I want to ensure minimal downtime, meaning that it doesn't take a long time to figure out what the thing does or how to execute it. So it can't be too involved. It doesn't involve multiple, rolls and then roll again and then check a table. Like, that takes too long. While evoking palpable theme and play styles, I do think very often in war games, Legion included, there are, and Warhammer's really guilty of this, you have like multiple different infantry squads, and they're all like slightly different. And I would like it to feel a little bit more distinct from one another. I also really like rules that are very thematic in that they are identifying. Like, that unit has an identity and they feel different on the table than the other units. Sometimes subtlety is good, particularly if you have like a bunch of knights with great swords and then a bunch of knights with swords and spears, or shields and spears, and then a bunch of knights that, I don't know, all have magic wands or something. Like, there are things that are similar with those, but I want them to serve different purposes within the army and not just be like, well, this squad has a further charge range and this other squad, I need more than just like a statistical difference or like some random ability that's like, this kind of fits. Like, I want it to feel significantly different between unit to unit. Scenarios reward meaningful choices and clever plays. This one is maybe a hard ask, but I really like scenarios that are not, I don't know, too match play, I guess. I mean, like the scenarios that we have, like the battle deck for Legion, is very good. It's also very, very subtly different. But once you've played several games of each like objective, you do see how it's different and it does affect what you're doing. So like, that's cool. And because they're subtly different, but still roughly similar, it does allow for, good match play experiences. It's very good for tournaments and stuff. Because this is a print and play game, I don't expect like tournaments to really be like a big thing. So I feel like I can be a little bit more adventurous with the scenarios. Scenarios being kind of subtle and balanced does help set up players to outsmart each other, as opposed to like, oh, I have this really thematic scenario where you're trying to escort this carriage along the bank of a river and there's only 2 bridges, and so the opponent's going to try to choke you at these bridges, and like, that's great, but there's also a chance that you show up to play with your friend and you're like, okay, let's play this scenario, and then one of you just steamrolls the other one because you happen to bring units that are like really good for whatever that scenario was, and it wasn't even something you planned. It just like happens. And I think that is a symptom of scenarios being very thematic and asymmetric and not necessarily super well balanced. But also, like, that's a bummer, right? Because you put it on the calendar, you carved out half a day to go do this thing, and then the battle was already kind of decided before it began. So that's why I get, a little bit anxious about saying, like, scenarios are going to reward meaningful choices and clever plays. And that just feels, I'm not going to say unobtainable, but maybe I'm not experienced enough of a game designer to be able to make that happen. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Unit customization allows for multiple strategies and player expression within a given army. So Star Wars Legion does this really well. There are other games where you can upgrade your units. In the Warhammer Magic expansion, there were magic items, and you could give a champion the Biting Blade, and it gave their stat line a boost for, close combat attacks. And like, that's fine, but that doesn't alter the function of that unit. It just gives them a little stats boost. And Kings of War also has upgrades that you can assign to your characters, but they don't. Sometimes they alter what that unit does or what they bring to the actual battle on the table. They can give you good advantages that way. But what Legion does is it says you can have a bear stormtrooper squad, and they're just there to like sit on stuff and maybe shoot maybe. Or you can give them a heavy weapon, and now they are like a not insignificant amount of offense. You can give them a short-range weapon or a long-range weapon. And the long-range weapon means that they're kind of like a pseudo-sniper squad. But the short-range weapon, like the clone shotgun, means that they are like an aggro, up-in-your-face kind of squad. In fact, you can combine the shotgun with 5s, and now they can move 6 inches further before they smash you with the shotgun. And like, that's really powerful. Or go back to that stormtrooper squad and you give them an astromech, and now they're an engineering squad and they're going to run around and repair your ATST. And I love the impact that those upgrades have. So that's what I'm going for. Interestingly, I don't have control over what models exist, but there's so many models that exist for Age of Sigmar, especially if you go into the expanded ranges like Warcry and Warhammer Underworlds. And like I can make rules for any model I want. There's a vampire that came out this month by, because it's like a commemorative series model. You can only get it at a Warhammer store. We can give that rules. Or we can just say they've made 49 different vampire characters that don't really have stats. And so I can say like, well, there's a vampire count and a vampire lord, and they're upgrades to existing units. And so you can have a squad of skeletons, or you can have a squad of skeletons led by a vampire count, or a squad of zombies that's led by a lord necromancer vampire, and just invite people to use these random models that they have, and kind of leave it up to them on what those models are going to represent, right? I'm not a company, so I don't have to say like one-to-one, like this is the vampire lord, and it has to be this one. You can use whatever models you want, as long as you and your opponent agree on it. Last thing I say here, Realmwars is published as print and play and can be played with easily obtainable components. I mentioned in my last video that I have to be careful about what components I ask people to use. I really like tokens in war games, like cardboard things that you put on the table as a reminder of some effect. And I would love to use those, but I'm not able to like produce those for people. I can release, STL files or print and play, PDFs. And probably I will do something like that eventually. But one of the things that makes tokens really good is they are a physical representation of a rule. And it can be difficult, if you're just using the rules out of a war games book and there's no cards and there's no tokens, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to cast this spell, and so now this character has this aura that passively affects everyone within 6 inches. And then I'm going to use this command on this other unit, and so they are going to, when they do this thing later, they're going to have an offensive buff. And then you do a bunch of other stuff in the middle, and then it gets back around to those things, and it can be hard and mentally taxing to remember those. So from a game design perspective, I want to be able to use components to make things easier, but and more straightforward, which is my goal in the middle here, straightforward unit rules. But I can't use too many components because I can't, I'm not selling a box of tokens that goes with this game to indicate all the different things that I might want to indicate. So my thought right now is that I'd like to have like one kind of offensive buff and one kind of defensive buff, and then one sort of like morale or universal buff. And so those are 3 different tokens, and you put the buff counters on the units to represent, like, it's like aim, dodge, and surge, and legion is really what I'm getting at. But then you also have to keep track of like, units suppression or their stress level or fear level or whatever, and that could be tokens too, and it very quickly spirals. So that's where I'm at. This is my elevator pitch. Let me know what you think if you watch this, if you listen to this video while you were doing some hobby time. I do really appreciate it. My next video is going to be all about the core tenets of my game. So I would love for you to tune into that. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about one-page rules and how I'm trying to do something that's a little bit different than what they did, but also what I'm doing is very similar to what they did. I got thoughts about it. So anyway, I'm done for now. Thanks again for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time.